I think with Meghan, I, I understand the need to be kind of part of the conversation and to use kind of her platform to do good, to shine a spotlight on causes that are important to her, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think sometimes when you continue to kind of repeat a story, if you kind of once you get your side of the story out there, you say what you need to say. I think sometimes letting it be and letting like that kind of live on. Just as we saw from Jackie, it can be really powerful, is what I would say.
Hi, all. Kinsey Schofield here. Welcome to Crown and Conflict, a series dedicated to dissecting the most riveting royal stories in history. We explore the characters that shook the monarchy and captivated the globe. Today, we're joined by Caroline Holloman, journalist and author of the fascinating new book, The Kennedys and the Windsors, the story of two dynasties, one born and one made. For generations, Caroline, both of these families have captivated the public imagination. I love that you point out one through inherited power and tradition, the other through political ambition, glamour, and unfortunately, tragedy. In your new book, you explore these remarkable parallels between America's closest thing to royalty and Britain's actual royalty. Thank you so much for being here and congratulations on the new book. I've been watching you post about it on social media, and there's like a real buzz and excitement about watching these two families come together in such a unique way. So, again, congratulations.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I have been working on this book for several years now, and I'm just so excited that everyone can finally, have the chance to read it.
Yeah, your secret is now exposed. The whole world can
Exactly.
now read your diary basically. So many people see the Kennedys as politicians and the Windsors as royalty. What made you realize they were actually telling versions of the same story? Because it's just unreal the parallels that you draw between some of these characters.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the phrase, the closest thing America has to a royal family is really key. I think, absolutely the Kennedys, at least in their beginnings, were a political dynasty, and that is a contrast to the British royal family. It's not the same. But I really kind of got the idea for this book when Prince William was bringing the Earthshot Prize to Boston in 2022. So I'm sure most of your viewers, your fans know about Prince William's Earthshot Prize, but it's his big global environmental initiative. And he launched it, and the first prize was in London, and then he brought it to Boston. And I noticed in my coverage for Town and Country, where I also work, that Prince William, kind of in the lead up to going to Boston, and then when kind of the itinerary for that trip came out, that he was really leaning into the kind of the Kennedy angle, because of course, Earthshot got its name from the Kennedy moonshot when President Kennedy, proclaimed we're going to put a man on the moon and we're going to bring him back home safely within a decade. And at that time, they didn't know how they were going to do that, but he still, with that confidence and ambition said, we're going to do this. And Prince William kind of had that same mentality for kind of environmentalism and kind of the issues that our planet is facing. He said, we don't know how we're going to solve them, but I'm going to launch this initiative and we're going to come up with climate solutions. And, during that visit, Prince William met with Caroline Kennedy multiple times. He toured the JFK library with her and two of her children. And I just thought that was so interesting, kind of how he was, leaning into this kind of Kennedy mythology, this Kennedy kind of legacy in order to help launch his big global initiative to Americans to kind of try and appeal to Americans. And I thought it was, just an interesting reversal of, again, that idea of like the closest thing America has to a royal family. So that really just kind of got me thinking about the times when these two families had met. And then, of course, as you mentioned, the variety of parallels between them. And really, the first one that came to mind was kind of the idea of public grief, and the issues that they have had to face with the media and their time in the public eye. And there's so many parallels, but kind of that was the origin story for this book.
You're right. Like it's unreal. Wait, I did have a question for you though.
Sure.
In your research, have you found a Fergie? Like who's the Kennedy Fergie?
Ooh, who's the Kennedy Fergie? Well, there's no one who quite aligns
I know
with
that's okay.
her.
That's okay. That answer is fine too. That's a totally fine. But I
I'll
was
be
thinking,
thinking about that though, Kinsey. I'll let you know if someone
okay,
comes to mind.
I love that. Well, which comparison surprised you the most during your research? Was there a pairing, a relationship, or a historical parallel that even caught you off guard, even though this is something you cover pretty religiously through Town and Country?
Yeah, I think a lot about Jackie Kennedy. I think she is one of the most fascinating figures in American history and world history, over the last century. I just find her, just her journey and her life and her personality, all of it just so interesting to me. She was a real entry point in the story for me. And something I didn't know a lot about was her life before she was married to JFK. And she was actually a journalist and she worked at the Washington Times Herald and she covered Queen Elizabeth's coronation for the paper. And I found her writing from that time so surprising because you think of Jackie as, glamorous and poised and so sophisticated and put together. And then you read this writing from when she was a young woman, and she's so funny and snarky and like pointing out things that are just funny. And she has these clever drawings. And so that is one thing that really surprised me. And then, just the parallels between Princess Diana and JFK Jr. And their kind of clandestine meeting in New York City in the 90s. I just love that interaction because really at that moment in time, you'd be hard pressed to find two people more famous in that moment. And they were able to meet up and to keep it a secret. And I just think that I'm just so intrigued by that.
I recently did a podcast episode about that meeting because of
Oh,
Love
really?
Story and I
Yes.
couldn't believe the amount of people that didn't believe that meeting happened in the comment section. Do you have a reaction to that? I mean, it's JFK Jr.'s closest friends say it happened, that nothing
Abs-
happened. There was no romantic interest in
right.
either part, but the meeting itself did take place. How do you respond to people that don't believe that they could keep something so big a secret?
I mean, I would say on one hand, I spoke with Rosemary Trenzio, who was there when JFK Jr. walked in the door of the Carlisle Hotel, and I spoke with Patrick Jeffson, who was in the room for the meeting. So I feel confident that it did happen, but I do understand the disbelief of the kind of, photos or it didn't happen mentality, and just it's pretty, hard to believe that they were able to meet without capturing the attention of the paparazzi. But that's why I think the meeting is so fascinating that they were able to kind of keep it a secret.
That's the CSI watcher in all of us. Like we need to see the physical evidence.
Exactly.
We
Exactly.
you kind of you mentioned Princess Diana, you mentioned Jackie Kennedy. So I'm sorry for bouncing around here, but I do want to ask what would have or could have Jackie taught Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy based on your observations? You're reading a young Jackie, you're seeing her observations too, like what her personality was as a young kind of independent woman. Um, do you think she would have offered her any resources or any guidance in this very difficult situation she married into?
Absolutely. I think that's the big question is what if? I think, so often in the Kennedy family, the idea of what if is a kind of pervasive question. But when it comes to Carolyn, she struggled throughout her life with the media attention, with the expectations of the public of what um, the wife of John F. Kennedy Jr. was supposed to be. And I think that, I don't know for certain, it's all hypothetical, but I think that I would hope that Jackie could have offered her some guidance in terms of how to deal with the press in a way that didn't fully take over her life and really cause her to become, something of a hermit, like that she felt like she couldn't leave the house, that she felt like she couldn't live her life. And I think, so often parallels are drawn between Carolyn and Princess Diana. And I think absolutely that people are right to draw that parallel, but there's a real key difference in that Princess Diana, at least some of the time, was able to find ways to get the media attention to work for her or that she was able to kind of collaborate in a way with reporters to get her side of the story out there, or to, give them a photo that would work for them and then they would leave her alone or something like that, or that she was able to use kind of the intense spotlight to highlight causes that were important to her. That is something I feel like was so key to Diana's legacy, is that she took the star power that she had and she was able to and to use it to highlight causes that wouldn't get attention otherwise. And of course, we continue to see the royals doing that today. But Carolyn never really got there. And I would just hope that, if she were to get some guidance from her mother-in-law, if Jackie had still been alive, that is something that they could have kind of helped manage together.
Yeah, absolutely. What could Meghan Markle learn from studying someone like Jackie Kennedy? Again, I mean, like I love that you brought up she was a journalist. She
Mm,
traveled the world.
yeah.
She was someone before she married this
Mm.
individual who took her to a completely different level and lifestyle. But she had a little bit of an independent streak as well.
Yeah, one thing that I look at that I think is just fascinating in our current kind of media landscape is how Jackie, I see Jackie as kind of the ultimate Kennedy myth maker. So after President Kennedy's death, very shortly thereafter, Jackie gave an interview to Life magazine. And that was when she kind of established this idea of Camelot, of a Kennedy Camelot, of how the administration, of how her husband had been a man who led with goodness, and it was a place of arts. And of course, kind of that idea of Kennedy Camelot tying to the legend of King Arthur. It kind of forever tied the Kennedys to the idea of royalty. And so she gives this one interview and offers her perspective on, her husband's legacy. And then she doesn't give more interviews, and she doesn't ever write a memoir. And, she continues to be in the public eye, absolutely, but she doesn't comment um, her late husband's life and legacy, or her time as first lady, or anything like that. And I think that that's really powerful. I think similarly, you know, Caroline Kennedy has lived a life, she's enormously famous, but she's managed to live a life outside of the public eye. But when she did choose to speak out about her cousin, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I think that was so powerful because it's so rare for her to make a statement. And you know, I think with Meghan, I, I understand the need to be kind of part of the conversation and to use kind of her platform to do good, to shine a spotlight on causes that are important to her, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think sometimes when you continue to kind of repeat a story, if you kind of once you get your side of the story out there, you say what you need to say. I think sometimes letting it be and letting like that kind of live on. Just as we saw from Jackie, it can be really powerful, is what I would say.
Right. We didn't have to hear the dish soap story 10 times. I'm just kidding. Well, you mentioned in the book that there's no rule book in marrying into a
Right.
family like this. This is a conversation we've heard Diana have, a conversation Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy had quietly with her friends.
Mhm.
Meghan Markle has this conversation with Oprah Winfrey. What qualities do you see in Catherine, the Princess of Wales, or Jackie Kennedy, where they made their own rule book? Really, I mean,
Yeah,
they're mavericks in that sense.
it's a great question. I think in some ways, certainly for Catherine, I think she had a lot of time to adjust, and she had a lot of time to kind of prepare herself um, from, dating Prince William for quite a long time, and even growing up with the idea of the royal family. She kind of, it was part of kind of her cultural consciousness. And I think she had a long time then to kind of prepare. And even when she joined the royal family, she had a period where she wasn't quite on the public stage because she was with Prince William when he was working. They weren't kind of doing royal engagements in the beginning. And I think she was able to adjust and kind of really chart what she wanted her role within the royal family to look like. And I think I think that's part of why she has been so successful is because it's been kind of a slow build. Um, with Jackie, in terms of making her own rule book, like I said, I think Jackie is just so fascinating, and I think that she was a real match for JFK, and I think she so sophisticated. There's the whole line of kind of I'm the man who accompanied Jackie Kennedy to France. She stood on her own and was really, had her own kind of a way of captivating the world. And so, I don't know what advice, you could glean from that, except just to kind of find your path and go for it, really.
Also, a man that will allow you to shine too, I think is
Yes.
really, really. And Prince William, I love the way that he talks about Catherine, and he's just so glowing. He says, "I'm proud of her," and
Hmm.
you're just like, "Oh, my heart's melting." Thank you for that.
Right.
You talk about Jackie's myth making. Who
Hmm.
handled myth making better, the Kennedys or the Windsors?
Mm.
Because you've got Jackie Kennedy and Camelot. And then, Princess Diana has become the second coming of Mother Teresa. And I
Right.
do believe that those were building blocks she started herself. Uh, of course, there's all sorts of other stuff going on when it comes to the Windsors, but based on your book alone, who do you vote superior in that expertise?
It's a great question because I think one of the real differences between these two families is longevity. So you look at the Kennedys and you think, and I got this feedback from people who I interviewed, who, some people, when I was like, I presented the idea of this book, drawing parallels, making a comparison, and some people said, well, there is no comparison. Like how the Kennedys have only been around for, this short period of time. The British royal family dates back centuries. It's different. And I think that's kind of what you have to look at here is I think the Kennedys have I think the Kennedys have it in terms of myth making, but they have just such less that they're working with, which is just this kind of past 100 years, and with the even less than that, and with the British royals, a story might come up that dates back, you know, to 1776, the beginning of America, or something like that, and so it's like constantly having to look at details, and similarly, I would say while the Kennedys are absolutely part of um, the public conversation, I think, we can get into it. But when I started this book, I thought the idea of the Kennedy dynasty was kind of fading in a way, and I don't feel that way anymore. But whereas the royal family, there's a story every single day. And so in order for them to kind of maintain that, I think they don't have quite the handle on it as the Kennedy myth making because it's ongoing, it's constant for them. And every single story is another day for them to kind of try and shape in the narrative.
Yeah. Never complain, never explain. Recollections may vary. Like we're overwhelmed. Always a news story. When you compare Princess Diana and Carolyn Bessette-Kennedy, what do you think is still misunderstood about
Mhm.
both women? Because they're cultural icons decades after their death. There was, a few years ago, we were hammered with The Crown season four, which introduced us to Princess Diana. The same year Spencer came out. Right now we're still enchanted by Love Story by Ryan Murphy. It's unbelievable that we are so fascinated by these two women still to this day.
I think when you use the word icon, that's kind of exactly what I think is interesting here. I think, particularly for Carolyn, when you think about her pre-love story, we really just had these images of her. So kind of icon in the true sense of the word, of just a style figure. You look at these photos of her, kind of almost Instagram mood board-esque. That's all people knew about her, really. And Princess Diana, I think, is a bit more than that, but certainly the photos of her, I think, live on as well. And what you said, kind of the Mother Teresa of it all, when people die young, I think they're deified. I think you kind of forget that both of these women were very complicated, and they were not saints. And they were not saints, and they also were not just the quintessential 1990s aesthetic. They were women who wanted things. They were women who made mistakes. I always think about kind of like, had they lived, I think they would have gone on to do incredible things, both of them, but also would have gone to have more complicated legacies than if they had just, than their tragic ends kind of when they were right in midlife. And I think, something that I want people to take away from this book is absolutely these are two families where the members have enormous power and privilege. And but at the same time, they're all just people, they're all just people. No one should be deified. And at the same time, I think they deserve some empathy in terms of kind of the media scrutiny that they have to face. And once again, when they have misdeeds, those should be acknowledged. Like I think that both Princess Diana and Carolyn Bessette kind of here have been flattened in a way because their legacy has been kind of, reduced to the good things that they did and the clothes that they wore.
Well, that's very true. When we're talking about Diana, all I can see flashing through my head is street style. Oh,
Right.
big oversized sweaters, biker shorts. But yes, they were both very good individuals. Also thinking about, I know that Love Story is based on a true story, but loosely, I imagine for you doing all of these years of research, how much does it kill you when you watch the scene in Love Story where Jackie's burning her letters? I remember reading in Paul Burrell's book about Diana's mother burning all of these pieces of paper she found in her office. Are you just like, I need that. That's research. I need that stuff.
I think something, when you talk about myth making and you talk about these two families, they have a tight leash on their legacies and what they allow people to, even researchers, historians and things like that, who they allow full access to their archives and things like that. I think it's a shame. I understand that need for privacy. I totally get it. But at the same time, like, oh, I would love to look at kind of everything,
Right.
that was out there. Absolutely.
But you're right, like that stuff happens so that they can control the fairy tale, so that they can control the narrative in some way. And that's fascinating that they go to such great lengths. The spare phenomenon appears in both families. You talk about that. I loved the Princess Margaret Lee Raswell examples. Talk to me a little bit about that, and why do second sons and second daughters so often become the most compelling characters?
Absolutely. Well, I am a younger sister. So I
So you're like, well,
yes, exactly. No. So I knew from the beginning that I wanted to have a chapter about kind of second sisters in the story because I agree with you. I think so often they are incredibly compelling and I don't know, maybe it's up to genetics or what have you, but I do think older siblings have a responsibility placed upon them, in particular in a family like the royal family, where not only is it, a family, but it's a family business and one with kind of a strict hierarchy within that. I can't imagine what that is like growing up knowing, that your older sibling has this defined role and you don't, and having to navigate that and figure out your path. And in some ways, I think that would be challenging, absolutely, but there's also so much freedom there. And I think you really see that with Princess Margaret. That duality of the challenge of knowing this is the role that my sister is taking on, and this is the path. And we, grew up sisters doing everything together. And at some point, that is all going to change. And she's receiving this education that's different from mine. But at the same time, Princess Margaret could do all sorts of things that Queen Elizabeth couldn't. And I don't know, I know there's a lot of talk about like eldest daughters and the responsibility that they hold. And I think maybe that has something to do with it in terms of Jackie and Lee as well. But Lee Radziwill is fascinating. And I think that, I wrote this in that chapter that she often gets reduced to Jackie's younger sister. And, she was a princess in her own right, and she was a muse and, an actress. She had any number of different careers, and such a fascinating figure who was friends with some of the most interesting creatives of kind of the 60s and 70s. Yeah, I love that idea of the Second Sisters. I think they're so compelling.
I love it too. It's fun to dissect that as well. Um, is America secretly more fascinated by dynasties than it likes to admit? Not my king rallies, but in April when King Charles was here, every channel was glued to every move. So we were enamored with this visit. We were enchanted by his speeches. And I was like, really? No kings? Well, we like this one, apparently. We went to war to get away from him, but here we are.
I know. It's so interesting to think about that. I think there's two things at play. I think America is interested in the royals and in royalty in part because it's something we don't have. I think there is that you're always interested in what you don't have, that curiosity gap of like, okay, what is this? And all of the pomp and circumstance, and we love a shiny thing, magpies, all of that. I think that is where part of the interest lies. But I think with the Kennedys and with some other dynasties too, I think we're in a real period of nostalgia. I think you can look at kind of any number of reboots that come out in terms of TV or movies, and I think interest in the Kennedys, it offers people, an escape from their modern day to think back to kind of whether that's the 90s and even the clothing that's coming back, or all the way back to kind of the 1960s and what seems to be kind of a simpler time, pre-internet, pre-cell phones, pre all of that, and that nostalgia. And I think the idea of a dynasty is kind of tailor-made for nostalgia. It's something that is, it's modern, but it's focused on the history because the history is why these families have significance. Um, and I think you're absolutely right. I think Americans are kind of more interested in dynasties than we would like to admit.
It's fun. I'll admit it. I'll admit it. Can you think of another example where we see such high profile families experience something as intimate and tragic as we've seen through the Kennedys and the Windsors? I mean, we've watched them grieve publicly. And when I think about it, yes, I can compare these two, Princess Diana, the loss of JFK, but I also in your book, I, again, the audience has to buy it, but you speak about Prince Philip engaging with JFK Jr. after the death of his father, and that's probably one of my favorite parts. But can you think of any other example? I mean, okay, I can go back and I can think of the death of Nicole Brown Simpson, but it's not the
Mm.
same. I wasn't familiar with these characters really. Yes, the whole country stopped and they watched this grief on display, which was horrible. And it was really the Goldman family that we felt where we saw so often. But I don't know if I can think of any other example where we were already invested and now we're even more invested because we are watching tragedy strike before our eyes.
I agree with you. I think these two families are singular in that way. And I think it sets forth kind of a sort of parasocial relationship of we're all experiencing this grief because we knew these families and we felt really strongly a connection there. And then, you go on to the next generation. And I think that's why, so many people, had such a strong attachment to JFK Jr. because they felt like I saw him grieve his father and he's growing up, and I'm still interested in him. And I think we see that with Prince Harry and Prince William as well. And I think that is just like a singular experience, these two families. But at the same time, I also think more and more people are having to grieve in the public eye. I think it's something that we haven't quite wrestled with. When a celebrity passes away, immediately there's a need for all of their former co-stars to put out a statement, and they're being asked about it on the red carpet. I'm thinking about like James Van Der Beek, for example. And if someone hasn't made a statement, it's kind of like, well, why not? And it's a little bit like let people kind of grieve in the way that they want to grieve and process things. And so I don't know. I think that's a shift in cultural norms where it used to be kind of only these families that at such a high profile have to grieve in the public eye and have spoken about how difficult and how challenging that is to really being expected at kind of all levels of celebrity, which I just, I don't think is a good thing.
Two things I'm taking away from that.
Yeah,
One is I in the book you write about how JFK Jr. admitted to friends that he actually had a harder time with this when he lost his mother. Like he
yes.
felt it's well, this is how I interpreted it in the book. He felt this responsibility to grieve in front of people.
Mhm.
Can you expand on that? Because I thought that that was really poignant.
Absolutely. You know, John F. Kennedy Jr. had literally just turned 3 years old on the day of his father's funeral. And so he didn't really remember that. Of course, there's that iconic photo of him saluting and, walking alongside his mother and his sister. And I feel like those images are kind of seared in American history. But he was so young, he didn't really remember that. But what his friends told me is that he found so challenging was that performance of grief over the death of his mother, and he felt like he had to act, like America's son, and he was on display for the cameras, and he really just wanted to kind of escape and process the death of his mother, with the people he was closest to, as opposed to um, doing so kind of for America. And of course, everyone in the country was reacting to Jackie Kennedy's death. And similarly, both William and Harry have talked about how kind of odd it was when they were grieving their mother, how upset everyone else was, and that was very confusing for them, and how challenging it was for them to be part of that cortege um, at Princess Diana's funeral. And I think that's just a real similarity and a real parallel between them. And I think that idea of public grief is something that both families it's still a part of kind of what is expected of them. Of course, when Queen Elizabeth died, there was so much there, so much that was required of the family to be in public, and so much ritual that was important for public life in the UK, and so many people who were upset about Queen Elizabeth's passing, and rightly so. But it's just a different sort of performance of someone who has to be in the public eye. And of course, young Prince George and Princess Charlotte were there kind of mourning their grandmother, and I think that would be incredibly challenging. And then I think about, when Tatiana Schlossberg, Caroline Kennedy's daughter, passed away earlier this year, the family was photographed leaving the funeral. So it just kind of continues on this kind of having to grieve in public, both of these families.
When you mention the this evolution we've had culturally where you're expected to grieve publicly,
Hmm.
what about the evolution of this invasion of privacy? Um, did Jackie have similar interest in her illness, or at least even like remotely to the extent of poor Catherine, the Princess of Wales? Did she have to deal with that invasion of privacy the way that Catherine did?
She didn't, because she didn't share it publicly, and it was so quick. Unfortunately, she had a very quick time having cancer before she passed away. But I do one thing that one thing that I didn't write as much about in the book as I would have liked to is, again, kind of the idea that these are all people, and sadly cancer is a real through line in both of these two families. And you can have all of the power and privilege in the world, and unfortunately, you still have to face challenges with your health. And I think it has been I feel like the kind of health challenges that both King Charles and Catherine have faced have really put that kind of into perspective.
Well, I totally agree with you on that, sadly. But it's like you said, it was so touching to all of us because we all know someone. I mean, the
Hmm.
year that they had cancer, or we found out King Charles still dealing with it today. But the year that they announced their cancer, I just lost two people to cancer.
Oh, I'm
So I
sorry.
was like, no, I'm not
Yeah.
going to debate what's going on with her because
Mhm.
we all know what a difficult situation this is. When I was reading the chapters about kind of the duel, unnecessary like duel between Prince William and Prince Harry, who both had Kennedy engagements
Mm.
within days of each other. I wanted to ask you, does the Archwell Foundation Award for Gender Equity in Student Film, this is a collaboration with
Mhm.
RFK's charity, still exist now that it's Archwell Philanthropies? I know that's a random question, but I was trying to figure out if some of these things have evolved because the charities evolved, or did they
Mm.
just drop off? And if you don't know, that's fine too. But as I was reading that, I was like, does this still exist?
It's a really good question, Kinsey.
Okay.
As far as I know, there is still kind of an ongoing relationship
Okay.
between the Sussexes and Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, which I believe now has changed its name to include
Are
Ethel Kennedy, who passed
are we
away.
all rebranding? Are we
Yes, we're
all
all but that award has not happened in several years now. It has not been given out. So it doesn't happen within, with a regular cadence. And so it's kind of difficult to say as far
Oh,
as I know.
oh, okay. That doesn't surprise me. I'm not going to lie to you. What does your book suggest about the future of dynasties? Can families like the Kennedys and the Windsors still command public fascination in this social media era? Bethany Frankel's twerking down the whatever the Sports Illustrated catwalk. Kim Kardashian is, you know, taking on law and promoting whatever lip gloss on Instagram. It feels like there is a tug of war when it comes to our attention spans. And are we going to continue to be fascinated or admire people like this with the way that the media landscape is changing so much and how attainable celebrities
Mm.
almost feel today?
Yeah, that's a big question. I feel
Sorry.
no, that's okay. I feel like it's interesting. As I mentioned earlier, kind of when I started writing this book, I felt like the Kennedy dynasty was kind of really fading a bit. They were out of politics in a way, and just not as much part of kind of the cultural conversation. And I feel like it's been a total 180 shift. And I feel like that kind of helps to illustrate why I think they'll continue to be part of the public eye and why these dynasties I think will remain. I think part of it is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has a prominent role in the Trump administration. That political dynasty is continuing there in a different way. And I think, Jack Schlossberg is running for Congress, whether or not he is elected, I think he'll continue to be part of kind of the political conversation moving forward. But more than that, I think is popular culture. I feel like in contrast to the royals, the Kennedys don't have a codified position in society or kind of daily life in America. And so there is a real question of kind of like, why do we still care about them? They don't have, a stronghold. There isn't a reason why. And I think part of it is Hollywood's fascination with them. And so I think Love Story introduced, JFK Jr. and Carolyn to a whole new generation that is interested, not only in them, but in the Kennedys at large. And there's a Crown-esque miniseries coming on Netflix that's filming now about a young JFK and his father, Joe Kennedy Sr., and I can't wait to see what that looks like. I saw literally just 2 days ago, it's going to be like a psychological thriller about Rosemary Kennedy, JFK's sister. And, you know, I think because pop culture keeps them in the conversation, I think we are going to continue talking about them. And, for better or worse, I think I think they will continue to fascinate. And with the Royals, I think they're in a different position because they do have a codified position. I don't think that the monarchy is going away anytime soon. I do think, people are looking more and more at William and Kate as the future of that institution. Um, they bring the youth and vitality that the royal family needs, just in terms of kind of public relations. And I don't see that dying out anytime soon. But you're exactly right. In the social media age, there's only so much attention to be paid, and both of the families kind of need to adapt. And I think we've seen that, quite a bit um, with the Prince and Princess of Wales in terms of, I feel like this year they have really changed their social media strategy with all of, with videos and things like that. And so an incredibly old institution, but I think they are acknowledging that they need to change with the times in order to kind of remain.
Do you have a reaction to some of I've seen critical commentary coming from the UK that some of William and Catherine's posts are too glossy.
Hmm.
I'm always like, no, it's great. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed every 30 seconds of that. But when Catherine was, I think when she posted her "I'm in remission" video, people were like, "Wow, that looked like it was produced in Hollywood." Well, we can do a lot with iPhones. We can do a lot. Do you think that they ever risk looking out of touch, or do you think that they have a really good strategy going right now and they understand their audience? And if you're criticizing it, maybe you're just not the audience that they recognize are, supporting them or want what's best for them.
I think that people are going to criticize them no matter what. I think if they were doing kind of all very authentic, haphazard iPhone footage, that looked less polished, I think people would certainly have things to say about that as well. But I do think, and I think part of it has been, again, with kind of Catherine's health journey and what she's comfortable with and being able to film things or take pictures when she's feeling great. I think that's part of this. And I think you can't fault her for that. I think just to tie it to kind of other members of the royal family, I really liked and think I really liked when Charles and Camilla were in the United States, their real mix of engagements. I feel like they had, you know, some that were very polished, very formal. Of course, there was the state dinner. There was, events that felt kind of like, okay, this is very polished. And then they had things that were engaging with the people, engaging with the public in the Shenandoah Valley, I believe, when they were in Virginia. And I thought at the end of the trip, I was like, that's what this trip needed. It needed something a little more folksy, a little more engaging with the public. And I think that's exactly the right mix. I think, as you said, I feel that visit was a huge success. For King Charles and Queen Camilla. And, keeping that in mind, I think is never a bad thing.
I lied about, I think I said this is my last question 2 questions ago.
That's okay.
But do you see any comparisons with the way we've seen Catherine protect her children and the way that Jackie protected her children after the death of JFK? They both seem to just be so maternal and instinctively know exactly what to do in this very chaotic situation that they were both thrown in, well, that they both married into.
Yeah, I think, both of them were in situations that the average person cannot understand. And what's really interesting is that Princess Diana actually saw Jackie as a role model. She looked to her and thought, I see the way that she has raised her children, and I would like to raise my children like that. I would like to raise Harry and William like that. And I just think that's fascinating. I think that's, part of the reason why when Princess Diana met with JFK Jr. in New York City at that meeting that we discussed, she knew she was going to say no to being on the cover of George magazine, but I think Princess Diana wanted to meet with John Jr. for that reason. She thought, he turned out okay. I want to meet with him and talk about that. Um, so that's really interesting that you're bringing up kind of the Kate parallel as well. And absolutely, I think I think they have been um very dutiful in terms of what kind of photos are allowed of their children, what they release. I think they're very careful. They know that there is interest in their children. They know that that is part of what life is like being in their family. But I think they are trying to protect them as much as they possibly can, in particular in in this challenging time, in the challenging time for their family in terms of her health crisis.
Well, and living in the world where everyone's a paparazzi. Like it's
Right.
amazing that they are so well respected in their community. We don't see pictures at the ball games. We don't see pictures of the children at school recitals. Like everyone is just so, and it does feel like they both recognized that the world felt like they owed us something from their children, but respectfully and kindly created a bubble where we didn't feel rejected by them. They gave us just enough to where we were still invested in the success
Mm.
of the family without feeling frozen out, which I think is a hard line. That's got to be a very delicate choreography to navigate. But the Kennedys and the Windsors, the story of two dynasties, one born, one made, available to order right now on Amazon. Or go to your local bookstore because we love local bookstores.
We
You know,
do.
you're on tour right now. People can stop in and actually engage with you. They should all follow you on Instagram, and I will link that below. Caroline, will you please come back the next time we have like a UK US mashup? If
Would
Prince
love
William
that.
comes back, you'll have to come back and give us your observations. And people can read your work regularly, Town and Country. So thank you so much for spending time with me today. You probably didn't realize you were going to spend as much time with me. I'm sorry, but the questions kept coming.
You know what? It's a fascinating topic. I
It
love it.
is.
Thank you
It
so
is.
much, Kinsey.
All right. We will hopefully see you again very soon. Agree with us, disagree with us. Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. But also make sure you pick up a copy of The Kennedys and the Windsors. It's a fascinating read. You'll walk away with something new. She has great sources, some never before heard stories. But I'm not going to give them away here because I need you to buy the book. I'll see you again very soon. Bye, everyone.